What is up, grinders? Welcome to a special edition to the MMA Ground and Pound podcast. I am your host, Mike Brown, aka H3 Buddha, here with my pal, LiamPicksFights. Liam, we've made it to UFC 300, finally here. 3 5-round fights. This is the one we've been looking for. 3 titles, 2 real titles, and then the BMF title. Interested to see if people know that the BMF title is actually 5 rounds. To be honest, I think, ownership will be accurate, but these lines have been out for a long time. So talk to that front, your overall thought process on this card. And then, honestly, we have nearly $2 million in prize pools guaranteed out there on DraftKings. Heck, even FanDuel has some prizes out there this week.
Yeah, well, I think a card like UFC 300, it's definitely attracting the interest of fight fans. But typically speaking, when you're talking about casual bettors, when you're talking about casual fight fans, when does it really ramp up? It starts to ramp up a little bit on Thursday, media day. People do a press conference, they start to have some sound bites, things like that. But when you start to see the weigh-ins, when you start to see the face-offs, that's when the casual bettors start, firing off. And that's typically when you start to see these lines, take even further shape, right? The limits are at their biggest. People are on the ground, ready to place bets. And you're talking now about the fight capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. So these lines have definitely been shaped. There's definitely been sharp action already on a lot of these fights. However, I think that we could see sharp action late as well. When you're looking at a fight card like this, there's a lot of big underdogs. There's a lot of, high level fighters, right? You don't look at most of these fights and say, man, who is this fighter? Why are they here, right? It's like most of these fighters, very high quality, very high level, and they've stacked it from top to bottom. So I think that for fantasy purposes, that's going to put people all over the board. That's going to take people's attention to a lot of different places. And I think that from a betting standpoint, it's the same thing, right? You could find value, huge value on one fight that people aren't even talking about, because it's a kind of fight card that's distracting, right? Look at all the shiny objects. If you can pick your, needles in a haystack, so to speak, you can find a lot of betting opportunities, I'm sure. So I'm hopeful that I can do that myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's like, what is he up to now? Minus 2 million. I mean, Bo Nickal, that's a context in its own self. When you have a Bo Nickal card, I mean, all the ownership's just going to go right there immediately, a first click. And, that's another layer to this card because there's a lot to break down here. But you mentioned it, the first fight of the night actually has 2 former champions. And we will start there where we see Davison Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt. Figueiredo near 3-1 favorite, minus 300, come back on Mr. Garbrandt, a plus 250. And Liam, first fight of the night, normally we can say is buried down there, but I mean, Cody Garbrandt has kind of got his stuff going again. He's starting to show up a little bit. He was fantasy relevant last fight. The one with the Trevin Jones, oh boy, that was not good. That was a 56-point decision. So we want to get back to the finishes. I think that's where a lot of the fantasy equity will be. Unless you believe there'll be takedowns, you're going to have to talk to me. And let's be honest, this is one of the lower-owned fights on the whole entire slate. 10% expected early on in the week here for Mr. Garbrandt, and Figueiredo about 20%. We look at those inside the distance lines. We know that Garbrandt can be chinny at times, minus 120 for Figueiredo. I think the thing is like, this is Garbrandt division. This is Figueiredo moving up. But I mean, these guys are similarly matched. The thing I worry about is fantasy relevance is if this goes to a decision. I think there might not be a lot to be had. That's kind of caked into that ownership, Liam. So if you say that there's some finish equity, I'm going to be interested because I just don't see extreme grappling, extreme control for one side, and I don't really see, just a super like 30-26 performance out of either of these guys.
Yeah, this is a tricky fight to get us started. There's obviously a lot more confidence in Davison Figueiredo because he hasn't shown as much chinniness as a guy like Cody Garbrandt. But when you look at Cody, one of those chinny performances is against Kai Kara France, where I don't think it was him being chinny so much as him cutting too much weight and then making some bad decisions, throwing leg kicks from inside the pocket. I don't think a lot of his knockout losses have been like, man, Cody's chin is just so bad. Because you see, sometimes he gets hurt and recovers, a little bit, enough to survive the round. I think that happened against TJ Dillashaw in one of those fights. And TJ Dillashaw obviously took years off his life and career, by knocking him out brutally multiple times. But when you look at those fights, you look at a guy in Garbrandt who he could definitely get rocked, wobbled, sent all over the place, but his lights don't normally get like completely shut off. He normally finds a way to keep like wrestling to a single leg or trying to stand back up. It's honestly remarkable. And when you look, Deiveson Figueiredo is the kind of guy you don't want to be hurt against, right? If you get hurt against Deiveson, he's just a really dangerous guy. He could turn up the jets really fast on you, get you out of there. And he could also get you with his submissions. Let's not forget that he's choked out a number of guys at the highest levels in the flyweight division. But when you're talking about this matchup, I think there's a lot that's presumed on the Deiveson Figueiredo side. Like, he looked okay against Rob Font. That was a fine win. But unfortunately, Rob Font's been on hard times lately. He's been losing a lot of these fights. He's been getting brutalized in a lot of these fights, dropped, hurt, rocked, knocked down. And you look at Figueiredo, he's not the highest output guy. I described him in my, thought process this week as a little bit like John Jones. He's a little bit of that single shot high variance. He's not throwing that much in combination. A lot of times he's throwing one big shot, trying to take your head off, and then regrouping and kind of, figuring it out. I saw somebody, I think it was Fightnomics, the guy who runs that account, Reed Kuhn, who posted like the lowest rate of striking in any of the fights this weekend is this fight, where both guys kind of go out there and pick their shots, and they both have knockout power. That's the other thing that I do think gets a little discounted, right? Trevin Jones is a guy that's very difficult to put out. You could submit him, but to put him out with strikes, man, he's really tough. And when you look at how you beat him, you normally just outclass him to a decision, outwork him to a decision. And he's hurt a couple guys in the UFC. So Cody Garbrandt went out there, avoided the chin check, was able to get to his positions early on, was able to land his shots. And then later on in the fight, just risk mitigation, get to the final horn, wins the fight. Okay. Brian Boom Kelleher. I thought that he was going to get his first career submission, my man. I really thought that Cody was going to go out there and just have a great opportunity to beat Boom, to shine in that fight. Just because Boom was coming back off of surgery, he was having a tough time. Figueiredo is not a spring chicken, right? Like, just because he's coming up from another weight class doesn't make him any younger. Doesn't make him, a guy that is just a proven commodity at 135. So yeah, we always thought he had the upside. He's 36 years of age. He spent a lot of time, in that trilogy, quadrilogy, whatever you want to call it, with Moreno. Has Moreno looked the same? I don't think so. And maybe Figueiredo's not going to look the same either. And honestly, I expected him to brutally finish Rob Font. Why? Because he's a very similar archetype to Pedro Munoz, who brutally finished Rob Font and quickly, right? And the reason that I say that is just because he's got a brutal guillotine. He's got a ton of power on the feet. It seems like the same matchup. And what we saw there was like, a lot more willingness to kind of just let the fight play out, let the fight materialize, not that same finishing instinct. And I do wonder what we're going to see in this fight in terms of Deiveson's level of aggression. It's the first fight of the night. These guys are getting us started. So the energy maybe isn't going to be there. The crowd maybe isn't going to be there fully. And I do think that Cody Garbrandt's a guy that could skirt the outside and outpoint him for 15 minutes. That's a potential outcome. Do I think it's the most likely one? No, I think they probably get into an ego battle and exchange a little bit at some point. That's the way that Figueiredo wins this fight. He's got more power. He's got a little bit better durability. But Cody Garbrandt can put you out. He can flatline you. He's done it to guys before. Picturesque knockout against Rafael Sunsao. Put down Boom Kelleher as well. So I do think that he still has power in his hands. He's the younger guy in this matchup by a considerable margin. So I just don't know why everybody's writing him off like he's got no chance. I think the chin is a huge concern. So I wouldn't make him a favorite here, obviously. But I just think I would probably make this closer to like Garbrandt, maybe plus 185. So I think
what about wrestling? What about wrestling? Because I
don't want to wrestle Figueiredo because Figueiredo's crafty on the ground, man. You don't want to be on the ground with him. I think you want to sprawl, brawl, keep it upright if you're fighting him, because I just think that you go back and look at that Perez sequencing. He goes right to a leg lock exchange. From the leg lock exchange, he turns out, takes the neck when, Perez is going for his back. And I know that Perez has been a mark for the guillotine in the past, but we saw how he looked against Moicano, right? His grappling's fine. He just got caught. He got caught early in the fight, dry, and he could not recover. And I think that for Cody Garbrandt, maybe he could get some wrestling success. Is it worth, the 12 seconds of control time for the chance that you get guillotined or armbarred on the way in? I don't think so. And I've never seen Cody really like take people down, hold them down, have a great aggressive top game. He more so uses the takedown to disrupt aggressive pressure. And I think he could do that to Figueiredo if Figueiredo's coming at him wild. But again, risk mitigation. I would rather him just like, if he takes him down, like literally disengage, because you don't want to be on the ground with that guy. He's too crafty.
Yeah, and I mean, they both somewhat have good takedown defense in general as well. You alluded to it. That striking stats are nearly the same, almost 3 strikes out there per minute, absorbing almost 3.5 to 4. Same thing for both of these guys, and not a lot separates it. That's why I think it's firmly one of those fights that it's not your first look. It's not pretty to the eyes. You'd be buying and playing into this one for the ownership. It's just you really want to go out in your shield on the first fight of the night. That definitely could just be the Spider-Man meme, point at each other, strike tit for tat, and doesn't score a lot of fantasy points over 3 rounds if it goes that long. Let's look at the next fight, though, that should potentially have some sneaky upside. We have Jim Miller versus Bobby Green. Mr. Green, minus 180 favorite. Come back on Jim Miller, plus 155. I guess, Jim did it. We were last time out, you were like, I don't know if they really want him to do it, but he goes out there, gets his win against Benavidez, 3rd round submission, 97 points. He's actually one of the better scorers in his wins, to be honest. He nearly scores 90 plus points in almost any one of his wins. Of course, he's got the ability to sometimes just go, 75 if he doesn't have a lot of his success with the grappling, etc. But his pace of his fights can be there. The problem is Bobby Green's fights usually aren't that great with fantasy output because it's usually distance striking, shaking his head, optic-wise, not the best fighter in the world when you're backing a Bobby Green. But these two guys, are long in the tooth. Jim Miller, the guy that was on UFC 100, 200, and going to be on 300 here. So just to give some context there. And Bobby Green's been along here for a long time. But I like the inside the distance lines because they're sneaky. They're like plus 235 inside the distance for Miller. Better than Bobby Green's. Bobby Green's plus 265 out there on the market right now. Do you think that this thing can score over 3 rounds? And do you think that a ceiling type performance out of one of these guys could get you to the promised land? Because it's the same thing, buried down the card. We know how high quality the upper echelon fighters are. Pricing $8,600 for Green, $7,600 for Miller. I have to say, people are going to want to play Jim Miller, aren't they? It's saying 15% for each of these guys. That Jim Miller ownership's going up, though. I guarantee that.
This is a fight where, again, there's going to be a theme to my breakdowns. I think a lot of the dogs are live on this card. And a lot of people don't feel the same way, right? A lot of UFC pay-per-views are chalk heavy. I'll acknowledge all these things up front. I can only call it the way I see it, right? And that last fight, I think that Davis and Figueiredo deserve favorite. But again, I'd make him maybe a minus 200, minus 215. In this fight, I would make it a pick 'em at best in all likelihood. Like, I think that Bobby Green in a decision-only market should probably be minus 185 here. Just because he throws more output, he moves around a little bit better. He's probably got the better conditioning of these two guys. Both are a little bit on the older side, but who's a little bit better conditioned? You'd probably say Bobby Green. Who's been fighting the better quality of competition? You'd say Bobby Green. So again, I think, over 15 minutes, you favor the better guy to win. And I think Bobby Green in the boxing, in the thing that's probably going to decide the fight, ultimately the effective striking, I think he's the better guy. And I don't know that Jim Miller has the wrestling, the takedowns, to get Bobby Green to the mat consistently in this fight. That's not really his game. If you look at him historically over time, more often than not, he's sitting somebody down with a left hook and then trying to choke him, right? He's not trying to go out there and proactively wrestle and grapple. And when he does, it's normally after he's done some damage on the feet. He's chopped up your legs a little bit. He's made you tired. And then he goes to the ground like he did with Gabriel Benitez. Hats off to the legend. So Jim Miller's been doing great in his recent run. I think 5-1 in his last 6 fights. Fantastic work. And I think that Bobby Green right now is coming back way too soon. So when I talk about the fact that in a decision-only market, I favor Bobby Green, in a finish-only market, I favor Jim Miller, and somewhat substantially here. Only reason I say that is not because Bobby Green can't knock him out, but he's not a prolific knockout artist. He's only knocked out a handful of guys at the UFC level. And when you look, Bobby Green is normally content to go out there, head shake a little bit, move around, throw some volume, style on people, show off his defense, point at people a little bit. And if he's willing to do that here, he's going to give Jim Miller a lot of opportunities. The facts are the facts. He got knocked out brutally 4 months ago. Everybody was calling it one of the worst stoppages in UFC history. Is it ever a good idea to run back out there 4 months later? He's not a young man. So he's coming back pretty quickly for a guy that got pretty brutally assaulted last fight. And the referee was complicit as well. He sounded pretty bitter about it at the press conference. So for me, like, would it be a nice story of redemption if Bobby Green's able to go out there and get the win? Sure. But what's a better story? Jim Miller, 100, 200, 300, bing, bang, boom, hold this left hook, and, maybe a guillotine to put you out of your misery. But I just have a feeling Jim Miller is going to find a way to get this done. I just think he's that guy. I think that on most nights, Bobby Green wins this fight. But for whatever reason, if you book this on UFC 300, I think Jim Miller wins. I think he finds a way to win. I think he's the more dangerous guy potentially at this stage of their career. So I think for Bobby, he wants to extend this fight, make it go long. Maybe get on top of Jim late in the fight when Jim's a little bit more fatigued and he makes a little bit more mistakes. But in the early going, man, Jim Miller is an old dog with a lot of tricks, and he's very dangerous in all positions. He can knock you out with that left hook. He can knock you out, he can put you down with those calf kicks. Brutally assaulted Dustin Poirier in the first round of their fight with low kicks, and he could also submit black belts, high level ones. Charles Oliveira, ask him how that went. They traded submissions now, but you look at that first fight, Jim Miller's an absolute dog. So I think that, this is the kind of fight where at plus 150, I'd have to be on Jim Miller or pass on the fight.
Aren't we double on him when the ownership is even? And if it's going to be this close, it's like, that's pretty juicy. We like the ownership for the upside. You're going to have to look for upside in this card with 3 5-round fights.
Something interesting that's reflected in the betting market as well, because I would have expected a lot more love on Jim Miller.
Mm-hmm.
It's about 50-50. So it's about 50-50 tickets on the Jim Miller side. There's more money right now on Bobby Green, according to the sources I look at. So,
I mean,
whatever that's worth.
It's like Bobby Green in the Ferguson and Dawson fight, 108, 128. But those are such glaring outliers to his historic scoring. So you're going to be buying into a Jim Miller, who's a historical point per dollar type of fighter. I like that type of spot. And let's be honest, there's some stronger plays around Green. And I bet you there's going to be guys around Miller that's going to absorb a little bit more ownership over that Green side. So we move on to the next fight of the night, where we see Marina Rodriguez versus Jessica Andrade. We have this one priced dead heat in the middle. We haven't had this in a long time, Liam. 8,100 each, okay? I don't even know if we have done a breakdown together where there's been an 8,100, because they just don't like to do that, because for lineup construction, it makes lineups very, very interesting, because technically 8,100 is like an underdog, and you're going to get a favorite for underdog price. And that favorite is Jessica Andrade at minus 140. She's going to be heavily owned compared to Marina Rodriguez because of that money line value, right? At 54, 55% equity. Come back on Rodriguez, a plus 110. But the big thing here is, I mentioned it early on in the week, I think a ceiling performance out of either of these two ladies is going to be very impressive for scoring purposes in context of slate, Liam, because if either one of these fighters scores over 105 points, I almost can guarantee that it's going to be optimal on this slate, just with the builds and the way to how to construct your lineups. And it's really kind of somewhat hard to ignore the style of fight and how Jessica Andrade seemingly is back. She had been doing it in the past. She was relying on wrestling in the past. Now she's going back to the striking, heavy striking. Knocks out Mackenzie Dern last time. 4 knockdowns, 132 points. A great buy low spot for her in that one. Of course, she was, had a bunch of losses to the upper echelon fighters leading into that one. But she's been a fantasy relevant girl for a long time out there. Very, very, very refined fantasy commodity. But we have Marina Rodriguez, who, oh boy, that was really gruesome to watch against Waterson Gomez. Let's be honest, it was not pretty, but she had volume. She had sneaky control time. A lot of her fights are going to come down to volume, but I'm going to be honest, on this slate, I am so interested in this fight in your breakdown, because I feel like if Andrade is going to continue to push the pace and be right there in front of her, that's going to make Rodriguez score points in bunches. And it's hard to argue that Rodriguez might be one of the best leverage plays on the whole slate when it comes down to they're both the same price tag, Liam, and nobody is going to want to play Rodriguez, especially in the big GPPs.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think that Rodriguez has like a small cult following, but I definitely agree with you. She's not the A side in this matchup. That would be Jessica Andrade, the UFC legend, the former champ, coming off a knockout win. But to your point, Marina Rodriguez coming off a pretty brutal assault of Michelle Waterson Gomez. I mean, how much does that win mean in the year of our Lord 2024, 2023, whenever that fight took place? Like that is up to your interpretation. But I think that when you look at Marina Rodriguez, she struggles against certain archetypes of fighters. And I think it's fighters that are better in the core competencies in grappling. She's actually listed on Instagram as a grappling coach at her local academy, which is surprising to me. Not to say that she doesn't have skills and talents there, right? She actually had a submission attempt against Mackenzie Dern, was able to stuff her submission attempts, throughout that fight and get the win. But when you look at Marina Rodriguez, I think sometimes the physicality has been a problem for her. She's a muscular girl, but she's also a little bit thin, long, gangly at times. And I just think that these women with lower centers of gravity are able to take her to the ground and kind of impose their will and their skill set. And we've also seen that people with power can contend with her. If you look at Marina Rodriguez, Amanda Lemos was landing big shots on the feet against her. She was not afraid to get in the fire. And obviously Amanda Lemos fought for the title. She got completely washed in that fight. And, Amanda Lemos had basically gotten gifted a split decision against Angela Hill that I thought she could have lost as well. So it's like the story of Lemos is one of like great fighter and great champion. She's got real skills. She got knockout power for WMMA, but she could fight hard for about 6.5, 7 minutes. And she got submitted in the first round by Jessica Andrade, and it was not a competitive fight. What happened in that fight is that Amanda Lemos started to land big strikes, and Jessica Andrade said, yo, I should definitely grapple here because this girl is landing big shots. And then she grabbed a hold of her, and it was like she saw a ghost. She was just too strong, too physical, wrapped up that standing head and arm choke and finished her in the first round. I had the plus 600 submission prop there. And, I just feel like Jessica Andrade never gets the plaudits for her wrestling and her grappling. She's 8 and something career to the submission. I think 3 and 4 in the UFC to the submission. So she's qualified in the grappling, right? The other thing is some of her wins, you don't really get to see in the stat line how important the wrestling and the grappling was. The draw with Rose Namajunas, she was able to mix in some aggressive wrestling pressure, right? She's using her boxing and it leads into her takedowns. Wrestle boxing is one of the oldest archetypes in MMA. And then you look at the fact that she can go out there and actually, slam, knock out Rose Namajunas, an all-time great in the UFC, picked her up, turned her sideways, slammed her on her head, and that was all, right? So you look at Jessica Andrade, and I just think that if I'm the UFC, why did I put this together? In my opinion, it's because Jessica has been there, done that for them so many times in the trenches at 135, at 125, at 115, whether it's for a title, not for a title, main event, co-main event, whatever you need to do. She's there. She says yes. She fights the toughest women. She beats the vast majority of them. Most of them she pulverizes into an absolute bloody pulp. I remember they gave me minus 141 against Caitlin Chookagian. How'd that turn out? She absolutely butchered her, and that was not a close fight. And Caitlin Chookagian's a top girl at 125 for a long time. A consistent top 5 girl, a title challenger. She absolutely embarrassed her, and she is a natural strawweight. So you just look at this girl, Jessica Andrade, and for me, she's going to be too strong. She's going to be too physical. She's actually a sneaky young fighter, right? Old in cage years, right? She's had a ton of fights. We'll talk about some other people like this, but she's had a lot of her experience in life in the UFC. We've seen her, stumble against the best grapplers at 125. Like, yeah, sorry, that's going to happen. Valentina Shevchenko, Erin Blanchfield, we'll forgive those losses up at 125. But again, for Marina Rodriguez, it's every good grappler she fights at 115 has given her a run or beat her. Cynthia Calvillo gets a 10-8 in round 3. Randa Marcos gets her in bad positions all over the place. You look at the Carla Esparza fight, loses a split decision. Carla Esparza was fighting like a bonehead. I'm sorry, with all due respect to the champion, she's out there pulling back guard attempt leg locks when she's on the top position. Like if we had played that fight back out and Carla Esparza was fighting like she fought Yan Xiaonan, she might have just finished Marina Rodriguez via TKO in that fight because she was taking her down when she wanted to, but instead of passing the guard, she's like falling back for leg locks and getting beat up. So I think that when I'm looking at this fight, man, the bottom line is this. Jessica Andrade is a UFC champion. Marina Rodriguez is a hanger-on in the division. She's 36 years of age. She could absolutely win the fight. I think her best path is a knockout. I think she has some submission and some decision equity, but I think that for the Jessica Andrade side, she's alive by every method, and I think she could pick this girl up, turn her sideways, and slam her on her head. So give me Jessica Andrade.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's an interesting fight. It's just pure action. If Andrade reverts back to that wrestling style, that volume striking, the power striking, she's got so many tools to win the fight. It's hard to ignore. And I'll tell you, she's going to be super popular. That's the problem I have is like 8,100, she still has to be exact because if she's scoring 80 points in a decision, it might not be enough on this slate. You really are looking forward to really a bunch of other fights on this slate. But at the same time, if the ownership's going to be here, she needs to get you 95, 100 plus points. And that's going to be still difficult. I just think, 2.5 takedowns per 15. Those are hard to ignore. The pace, almost 6.5 significant strikes per minute for Andrade. A lot of the stats are backing her, and obviously the money's been flowing in because there's going to be value. It's just if you're playing Rodriguez, know that you're going for the leverage, and you really hope that Andrade's a little bit more long in the tooth. We move on to the next fight of the night, where we see Jalen Turner versus Renato Moicano. We have Jalen Turner minus 230, minus 250s out there at this stage. Come back on Moicano about a plus 200. So it should be a fun fight. You talked about Jalen Turner knocking out Bobby Green last time viciously, and 114 points. Pretty nice. 8,900. He always sits around this 8,900 in his last couple fights, and he can easily pay that off. The guy has striking, distance striking, some volume at sometimes, sneaky control time if he's able to knock you down. But that finish equity is really what we're going to be buying into on this one. And then you look at Renato Moicano, a guy who has been hurt multiple times in the UFC, finished in the UFC by knockout. Is it a binary matchup? I guess I should ask right off the bat. And then are you going to be interested in Jalen Turner kind of competing with the likes of the 5-round fights with ownership? Or do you think he should be, a little bit lower owned? And is this a case where we might go with the grappler and Moicano, who's 12% compared to Jalen's 34%?
My brother, let's talk about leverage. This is a great matchup on paper because it's going to give us some real answers about where Renato Moicano is at. I think for Jalen Turner, he's still on his path of development. Like, he's obviously a great fighter. He's obviously got a lot of talent, but I think there's still kinks to be worked out along the way, right? The win over Bobby Green is great, but you know who's got the same win? Drew Dober, who's nobody's talking about as the next big thing. Nobody's saying is this great fighter. And the difference between those fights is that, Bobby Green was whooping Drew Dober's ass with all due respect, and then he got knocked out brutally. That was the way that the fight went. And then you look at the fight with Jalen Turner, and he never got going. He just got beat up because Jalen Turner is huge. But I've been a Jalen Turner proponent. You got to remember some of those times in the past where I was telling you, man, who is Uros Medic? Plus 108, Jalen Turner. Let's take the sub prop. Let's go. Let's just find a way to push our chips in on this guy who's absolutely massive. Brad Riddell, the kickboxer who's going out there shooting takedowns in every fight. Yeah, let's see if we can get Jalen Turner to wrap up a front choke on this guy. Like, we took those opportunities when they were there. And I think that that time has passed. I think that right now, Jalen Turner is a guy that people really love. They really respect. They're really getting behind him. And I think Renato Moicano, on the other hand, is a guy that people, have a strong opinion about. Some people like him. A lot of people dislike him. It's his attitude. It's the way he presents himself. I'll tell you personally, I like Renato Moicano. Do I agree with everything he says? No. Do I think sometimes he comes off foolish? Sure. But the greatest moment in UFC history is Renato Moicano submitting Damir Hadzovic instantly and then saying, I wanted to fight more. And then Damir Hadzovic looking at him earnestly and like saying, well, then you shouldn't have submitted me. And it's like the greatest moment in UFC history. Renato Moicano was a part of that. He's out there cutting promos that are worth money. He is a guy that's interesting. So you put him against a guy like Jalen Turner, and everybody's expectation is this guy's going to get knocked out. Because why? Because he got knocked out by these people. Jose Aldo. Yeah, bum. Never heard of him. the Korean Zombie, bum, no power punching, never heard of him. And by the way, that was when he was emaciating himself. He's huge, cutting down to 145 pounds. Stop doing that. How many guys at 155 had knocked out Renato Moicano? You know the answer to that? One guy.
Well,
One guy. You know who it was? Rafael Fiziev.
Oh,
How many
boy.
guys want to stand with Rafael Fiziev? He almost fucking sent Justin Gaethje's head, into the third row. Justin Gaethje gave him some back, but you look at that fight, he almost knocked him out several times, multiple times. Justin Gaethje was like buzzed. He flatline killed RDA with a huge hook, which guys, Garbrandt didn't do. How many guys do you want to go through the list that didn't knock out RDA? This guy knocked him out. Fiziev is one of the most dangerous strikers in the lightweight division, period, point blank, no two ways about it. So he got knocked out in that fight. By the way, it was like one of his first fights up at 55. That's a tough transition. Hey, I was a top guy at 45, so now here's one of these killers that nobody's ever heard of in Rafael Fiziev. The UFC did him no favors there. But then you look at his recent run. He goes out there, he's beating company guys, long-term guys, Drew Dober, guys that have stuck around, not guys that are new on the block. Calvin Kattar's a great fighter, right? Everybody respects that guy. Renato Moicano whooped his ass on the feet. Nobody wants to talk about that anymore, but it happened, and we were all there. And he literally calf kicked him to death, moved around, boxed with him, and he looked like the better striker for the whole time that they fought. So when you look at that kind of matchup, you just say to yourself, man, this guy Renato Moicano is either going to get flatline killed by Jalen Turner like everybody expects, which is very possible, or he's going to surprise people. I'll tell you what, one of the biggest bets of my life, and I've had many, right? I could go through and recap all my shit's tracked for a long time. You could see my bets. I'll tell you when they were good, when they were bad. I had 7.5 units on Rafael dos Anjos against Renato Moicano. And I, to my core, believe that was a great bet, right? It was like minus 150, 2 rounds into that fight. He's like minus 1,800, absolutely styling on him. But by rounds 4 and 5, man, that fight started to get somewhat competitive again. Renato Moicano, with half of his face hanging off after having himself shellacked on 5 days' notice, by the way. 5 days' notice. He gets the call. Hey, can you do it? He said, I'm big right now. I don't know if I can make the weight, but if they can do some kind of catch weight or something, then I can do it. I'll fight him. He said, okay, fight him. Step in for a co-main event on a pay-per-view. This guy has made the walk against the best guys in the sport. 145, 155, short notice, doesn't matter. This guy makes the walk. And so he's 34 years of age. Maybe he's aged out. Maybe the chin's gone. He did get hurt against Drew Dober, but he found a way to win the fight. And I'll tell you one thing that stood out to me on paper, man. One thing that is very hard to ignore. Jalen Turner is 4-0 career to the submission, and he's never submitted one guy who's worth $1 on the grappling. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful. These guys would beat me, but let's just be serious. Brad Riddell and Uros Metis, these guys are zero grapplers at the UFC level. Nothing, nada, not going to beat guys at the UFC level grappling. That's not what they do. Okay, so then you look at, on the other side, Renato Moicano is going submission for submission with some of the best guys. He's submitting black belts like Cub Swanson. He's going out there, and it takes till round 3 of Brian Ortega getting an absolute shellacking for him to find one position where he can actually beat Moicano with that choke. That's the only submission loss of his career. It's to Brian Ortega. It's to title-level fighters. It's just like, I look at Renato Moicano and I say, he could get club and subbed. He could get knocked out. But if this fight goes 7.5 minutes, I think Renato Moicano becomes a live favorite. I think he will have better cardio in the tank. I think Jalen Turner is a known gasser. I think Jalen Turner has been knocked out in the first round multiple times, and people want to ignore that and forget about that. But it's happened, and we were all there, and we saw it, and it happened before the UFC. So now people don't want to talk about it. Who fought the better quality of competition in the UFC? It's not close. It's not competitive. Some of the recent fights, Garbrandt, these things, okay, we'll give you credit, Jalen Turner. But Brock Weaver and fucking Callan Potter and all these, we're throwing all those out. We're getting those off the record. So it's just like, we got to look at who these guys have fought and how they perform. I think Renato Moicano has shown if the fight hits the scorecards, he should be favored to win this fight. And the odds makers agree. So it's just like, in a fight at lightweight where it hits the scorecards more than we expect, I feel like Renato Moicano is another live underdog here, man, and I can't ignore that.
Yeah, and it's funny because you look at that money movement too. It was like, I'm pretty sure it opened even at somewhere. I can't find it on fight odds, but I think it was somewhat close to even.
I think it was DraftKings opened the line. I think it was like minus 110 or minus 120 Jalen Turner, and it got smoked 100%.
Yeah, and another just observation while clicking around while you were doing your breakdown. Interesting how those Moicano, second round, third round props are starting to trend down a little from the plus 2,000s, basically.
Maybe because Dan Hooker almost submitted this guy.
Yeah, interesting. And you talk about leverage, that's going to be an all action fight. I mean, most of these fights are going to be all action, let's be honest. But I think looking at the fights outside of the 5 rounders are the ones that can really set you apart from the competition, because it's just so much ownership towards those fights that if one of these guys is going to score 100 plus, you're going to want it. And you said there's a potential here. And I like the ability for Moicano to score over 3 rounds as well. Whereas I think Jalen's is going to be a little bit more narrow. His scoring ability over 3 rounds is not as good as Moicano's can be. Let me just put it that way. We move on to the next fight of the night, where we see Diego Lopez versus Sodiq Yusuff. We have Diego Lopez about a minus 140 favorite, come back on Yusuff, a plus 125 range. Diego, 2 fights in a row, 90 points, didn't even have to throw a strike in that one. No stats, the rare time 90-point win, followed up with a 105 against Sabatini. This guy's on fire. A lot of love for him, but he faces a tough guy in Sodiq Yusuff. I think this is, going to be a really interesting test. But, last time out against Barbosa, he loses a 5-round decision. He's still throwing volume out there over the 5 rounds. Guy that historically, when he goes to a decision in Yusuff, not the best scorer in the world. But I think he's got a guy in front of him that's going to force some scoring, Liam. And I think that's a very interesting one. I wonder what the ownership is in the beginning of the week. And I was thinking Yusuff might be a sneaky play. Seeing a little bit of love for him on the X sphere, the old X Twitter. 20% ownership for Yusuff. We have Diego Lopez being 20 as well. That's actually quite interesting, Liam. So kind of under-owned as a whole on this fight. And I just wonder if it's because they think it's going to go to a decision. We have it as a minus 165 inside the distance. Things aren't adding up on that, Liam. It should be a little bit better if it's expected to finish inside the distance. There should be more ownership on this fight just by the metrics.
Yeah, this is a fight where, I think that there's a big divide in the community. You look and some people think Diego Lopez is a fraud. They think he's a fugazi. They think that he's not for real. They don't like his process. They don't like his style. They don't like the way he competes. And I think that there's some merit to that in terms of the process, right? Ending up on your back is just always going to make it harder, right? You want gravity as a tag team partner, as Chael Sonnen wants to say. And I think that when you look at this fight, Sodiq Yusuff is just not very likely to pursue takedowns. So I think the fight is more often than not going to stay on the feet. I do think that Sodiq Yusuff is the better striker technically, but I also think that Diego Lopes takes more chances. I think that he probably has more durability than Sodiq overall. And I think that he's got more offense in the grappling should it end up in those positions. I think he's more willing to attempt submissions. I also think that he's much more, willing and able to club and sub in this spot. Sodiq has some ability to do that as well. We saw that against Don Shainis, unfortunately, a great fighter and friend of the show, but he got clipped in that fight, and Sodiq was able to grab a hold of the neck. So Sodiq definitely has some submission prowess. He's a Team Lloyd Irvin product. He's been training his jiu-jitsu for a long time, but it's nothing like Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes is out here submitting black belts. He's out here doing, a great job off of his back. Joanderson Brito won that fight, and he looked good doing it for portions. But other portions, guys, it looked like Diego Lopes was going to catch him with submissions off his back, and Joanderson Brito is very good, right? He's a very dangerous fighter. So I think that Diego Lopes kind of gets a bad rap because he doesn't fight in a traditional way that people like. But you know who he fights in a way that somebody likes is Dana White. Right? He goes out there, puts it all on the line, swings till the bitter end, tries to kill you the whole fight, always throwing up a submission, never going out there and being complacent, saying, let me hold on. He's out there to fight for 15 minutes as hard as he possibly can. And I think that for Sodiq, you mentioned it, man. He doesn't always go out there and press his advantage. Yeah, he gets the win, but sometimes he just leaves it in the balance. Sometimes, he goes out there, rocks Barboza, doesn't put him away, kind of just lets the fight slip out of his hands, lets the time pass him by. That's not something I want to see from my fighter. I think Diego Lopes would rather die than give up in the octagon. So there's a real chance that Sodiq Yusuff knocks his block off. I mean, he's just a huge hitter. He's a big guy. He's powerful. He's a more technical striker. But Diego Lopes has had good results in the UFC because he does things that win fights, like getting in somebody's face, throwing a ton of aggressive volume, putting them under pressure and duress, and making them make bad decisions. And for Sodiq Yusuff, he's a guy that's very talented, very skilled, but Edson kind of let him off the hook in that fight. I thought late in that fight, Edson could have finished if he had pressed his advantage, if he had wanted to. But he was more content to just get the win, keep the ball rolling in the right direction, not take any undue risks. This guy, Diego Lopez, for better or worse, takes risks. And he's going to go out there and try and kill this guy from second one till the very end. And I think that for Sodiq Yusuff, that's not a fight he's going to like. I think that Sadiq can win it by knocking him out, by getting him off of it, by just dominating him physically. But unless that happens, I think Diego Lopez is eventually going to find a way to win this fight, whether it's going well or it's going poorly. So that's just the way I see it, man. I believe in Diego Lopez. I've liked him, in a couple of these fights. And I thought that the rubber might meet the road against Sabatini just because he's such a good grappler and he knocked his block off. It's like he's taken the path of least resistance against these guys so far. And against Gavin Tucker, I thought he could have knocked him out on the feet, but Gavin was smart. He went for the takedown early, and that's what I would have wanted Gavin to do if I was backing him. And what happened? He instantly got submitted with a perfect technical triangle armbar. Brutal stuff. It's just like, that's what Diego Lopez has. You want to go to the ground? I'm very technical. I'm very dangerous, and I'm very aggressive. You want to stay on the feet? I'm going to swing hooks at your head like I'm trying to kill you until the bell is over or the referee pulls me off. So I just think that's a hard guy to fight. And I think that right now, coming off a loss, coming off a brutal war, it's a lot to ask of Sadiq. But he's a tough guy. He's a capable fighter. He could definitely defend his spot. But I think they want Diego Lopez to take his spot, and I think that's why they booked this fight.
Yeah, I concur with you. And let's be honest, we rarely have this like dynamic where, you have these 5-round fights that are just below Lopes, right? That are going to absorb more ownership, way more ownership, let's be honest. And 8,500, we've had 5 cards where plus 110s are 9,500, and he's 8,500 and plus 110 inside the distance for Lopes. Very interesting on this slate. And then I got to ask you one thing that I would worry about. Isn't Yusuff the smart fighter? What if Lopes does play the ground game and he's okay with being on his back? Is that going to just negate some of will he play the guard game? Will Yusuff try to go that route if he has to, just to control him on the mat?
I'll just be frank. Like, who wants to be on top of Diego Lopez? Like, show me that guy. Because like Movsar Evloev is a very good grappler, very competent guy. I bet Diego Lopez plus 688 going into that fight. And did he win it? No, he did not. Did he score a lot of fantasy points? No, he did not. But did he put Movsar in deep danger several times? Yes, he did. Did he make Movsar very hesitant at times? Yes, he did. And I think that the same is true with a lot of these guys. I don't know who wants to get out there and grapple with him. Gavin Tucker, BJJ black belt, very competent on the ground, lasted about 8 seconds. It's like, now do I want to go out there and try my hand next? And Joanderson Brito, again, physical hoss, beast, strong, talented, brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He was in deep danger multiple times against Diego Lopez. So I just think that Diego Lopez is like not a guy you want to play games with. It doesn't matter who you are. He might break your arm. It's like I've said it before about Andre Muniz. Like, yeah, maybe you could tire him out and stuff, but like in the early going, when you're fresh, it doesn't matter who you are. He might just break your arm off. Like, that's how good he is at his one move. It's like, oh, he's got one move. Yeah, the one move breaks your arm. So it's like,
yeah, and one of the best haircuts in all of the UFC, Diego Lopez. Let's be honest. Let's move on to the next fight where you see the debut of Kayla Harrison versus Holm. Minus 440s out there, trending towards a minus 500 for Harrison in her debut fight in the UFC. And Holm plus 340, 300s plus out there, man. Crazy to see that. But first of all, have to lead in with it. Making weight, super important. Recording this on Thursday evening. It will be on, the articles. If there's a weight miss, a miss weight, same thing. But it's hard to ignore Kayla Harrison in any format for scoring purposes. She's not going to show anything at the moment, right? That she scores very well. There's no way in hell she's 10%. Don't believe that. That's got to be a miscalculation. I'm going in there and manually changing it later on, Liam. There's no way. But she's takedown, judo artist, gets you down, controls you, looks to the finish. And she's been facing absolute lower tier competition. But Holm, man, where is she in her career? Like, she's very, very, very long in the tooth, slower pace striking, kickboxing at distance, but she's going to be forced into the sprawl. So if there's a world where Holly Holm wins the fight 6,900, I'd be interested if she does the Ronda Rousey head kick type knockout on an entry. I wouldn't be too surprised. But I just think that this is one of those spots where if you're taking Harrison and not taking Nickal, you're hoping that Harrison gets in there, dominates for 4.5 minutes, and then gets a finish deep into the first round, because Bo Nickal's gonna have a quick win bonus in his pocket, or potentially, that he can play with, and he could also do the same thing, 4.5 minutes. So I think it's a very interesting fight. I think that the weight thing is going to be something I'm going to be keeping a keen eye on. And also for this fight to be, so far down the card, I feel like they want to give Harrison a potential win, get her in here, look good, then shoot her right up and get that title shot, because her scoring is going to be tremendous for fantasy. Liam, there's no way she's 10%, right? Just there's no way that she's going to be way higher.
One of the things that I found a little bit interesting about Kayla Harrison is that if you kind of like poke outside the MMA bubble, it doesn't seem like anybody knows who she is. Ronda Rousey, what made her a star? She transcended the sport, right? She's on talk shows. She's on, The View. That, like, whatever you want to say. Like, she's out in public. People want to know her story. Who's this MMA fighter who's also somewhat attractive, who's also, a judo medalist, and she's done all these things. It's like, and she's got this crazy story with her mother and all this stuff. Ronda, the story sells itself, right? There was no women's MMA, and now it's all her, and everything's put on her shoulders. And you look at Holly Holm, and she was able to go out there and knock her out. This is the biggest upset in MMA history by the numbers, as far as I'm aware. If somebody's got a bigger upset, I'd be curious to know it. But I'm talking about at the UFC level. I believe it's the biggest upset of all time in the recorded odds era. And when you look at that fight, the perception going in was Holly Holm, how does she win this fight? How does she win this fight against a girl who's just going to have so much of a grappling advantage? How much grappling took place in that fight? If you remember, almost none, right? Virtually no grappling. And the reason that was the case was because Holly had the footwork, and she had the boxing clinch breaking skills to win the fight. And I'm not here to say like I thought Holly was going to win the fight or something like that, where I had a ticket in my pocket, but I did have a feeling she could win that fight. Just looking at Ronda's emotion, Ronda was so emotional at the face-off. She was like angry and bitter and, throwing things down and, yelling at Holly Holm. And Holly Holm's like, cool as a cucumber. Like, what are you doing? Why are you so fired up about this? And then she let out the emotion when, after she just kicked her head into the third row, then she screams, then she yells, then she lets herself feel something. Man, she's a cold killer. She's been doing this combat sports shit her whole life. So did we see a flat, bad performance in her last fight? Yes, against Mayra Bueno Silva, who tested positive, result gets overturned. I think that was ADHD medication or something. But hey, she did look more focused than Holly, so you give her that. But you have to question, where's the level of motivation for Holly Holm, right? But here's the thing, man. This is the thing that's sticking in my craw for this fight. The level of motivation that I would have to go fight Mayra Bueno Silva in the Apex somewhere would be very low. And Holly Holm, unfortunately, in that fight, had no clear advantage. I thought that Mayra Bueno Silva was the deserving favorite there, except maybe the cardio and the decision equity. That was like her path to winning that fight. But who's the more dangerous fighter between her and Mayra Bueno Silva? I mean, be serious. Like, Mayra Bueno Silva is just heavier handed on the feet, and then also she can grab a hold of your neck and choke you out. She's taking big shots from Manon Fiorot. She's a tougher woman. Mayra Bueno Silva, she just went 5 rounds with the champ. Like, you just know Mayra Bueno Silva, tough woman and dangerous. Holly Holm, really was swimming an uphill battle there, I felt. And I had actually bet Mayra Bueno Silva by knockout. If you remember that fight, Mayra Bueno Silva was tuning her up like an old guitar on the feet. And then Holly Holm shot in, tried to get muscle her around in the clinch. That's what she normally likes to do to these women at this stage of her career. And what ended up happening there ends up getting, put in a ninja choke. I've always said the ninja choke, you don't have to be the better grappler. Yeah, you don't have to be really sophisticated. You put somebody's head in a vice grip, they're going to sleep. So that's what she did. She put her head in a vice grip. And I think that in this spot, man, Kayla Harrison could be everything she's cracked up to be. She could be as good as advertised. She's got the judo medals. She's won all these fights. but she's done it mostly at 155 pounds. She did judo at 170 pounds. It's now coming down to 135. She didn't want to do that. She has to do that. Right? Why did Norma Dumont and Chelsea Chandler and all these other women decide, hey, I'm going to go to 135? Because there was no other options left. They said, if your name's not Amanda Nunes, we're not keeping a division around for you. Thanks anyways. Cyborg as well. So now you've got Holly Holm doing a real training camp. She's brought in Chris Cyborg. She's training with Izzy Style Wrestling. She's got the jiu-jitsu instructor from Albuquerque, Gracie Baja, doing individuals and privates with her all the time, with Chris Cyborg as the other body in there with her. Is she taking this fight serious? I would reckon the answer is yes. Why? Because this is a fight that means something. You're fighting in the Apex Center against Mayra Bueno Silva. Who cares? I don't care. She didn't care. Who cares? Mayra Bueno Silva didn't care. Now you're looking at this fight and like, it's UFC 300, man. If you think Holly Holm's going to phone this one in, I would just disagree with you. If she gets overwhelmed and overrun by the better athlete, so be it. But I'm telling you, the way I look at this fight is like, you've got to prove something to me. Where, yeah, she beat Larissa Pacheco. Those are her only good wins. You know, as far as I'm concerned, Aspen Ladd, okay win, decent win, nothing that blows my hair back. So I'm looking at it, I'm saying, man, Kayla Harrison, she could wrestle a little bit to the double leg. That's maybe the thing that makes her different than Ronda, right? She's a better judo player in that way. But in terms of the arm bars, is she as prolific with her finishes? Not really. Like Ronda was like the best first round finisher with the arm bar in MMA history. So it's like, I just think that this is a fight where if Kayla Harrison's not getting the finish early, she's used to competing at PFL events, which are more akin to the Apex Center. You know, it's like, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I've been to a PFL event. I had a great time. It was a cozy atmosphere, right? You go to the UFC, it's an arena. It's a different feeling. So I'm just saying, this is UFC 300. This is the biggest show there's ever been. Crowd's going to be popping. And I think they're going to be cheering for Holly Holm, if I had to guess, because Kayla Harrison is a non-entity. You know, when you just look at the social media figures and things like that, I think they brought her over. And this is a cynical take by me. I could be dead wrong. But I think they brought her over in the hopes that she gets head kicked into the third row, and exposed. Because then they could say, don't watch the PFL, don't watch the World Series of Fighting, don't watch Bellator, don't watch any other organization. It's the UEFA say. It's UFC only. 3 letters that matter. And that's what they want to prove. And if Holly Holm at 42 years of age can shut down another judo hype job, she would be the one. She would be the GOAT. First ballot Hall of Famer. Put her in there. And the thing about Holly is this. She could look flat on certain nights, and she could be the best in the world on other nights. We've seen that from the time she was a champion until today. And the other thing I'll say is Irene Aldana just recently fought for a title against Amanda Nunes. Okay? Holly Holm embarrassed Irene Aldana from minute 1 to the end. I know because I bet Irene Aldana. It was not close. It was not competitive. Took her down, dominated her on the feet, outboxed the boxer, did whatever she wanted to in that fight. So when I look at this, I'm saying, man, Kayla, if she's on top, yeah, she's going to have some success. How many women have gotten on top of Holly Holm? Few and far between. Normally the best girls. How many times she lost as a dog? 3 times to the best women in the sport. So it's like, I just feel like this is a spot where Holly Holm is probably the value side. And sometimes the value side doesn't win. Sometimes the hype A side comes in and just dominates like they're supposed to. But how many UFC debuts have gone awry, ladies and gentlemen, before you have to see with your own 2 eyes, like this shit's not easy to just transfer over and everything goes hunky-dory. It was not long ago that Michael Venom Page was an underdog making his UFC debut against a far less proven fighter than Kevin Holland. That's just the facts. So,
I mean, Kayla also did lose. I mean, it's not like we're talking about an undefeated prospect, blah, blah, blah. She's 33.
She almost got finished in that fight. And she did a great job. She hung on. She got the takedowns when she needed to. Larissa Pacheco is tiny. And I don't mean in terms of she's physically weighs a lot. I'm saying like height, limb length, right? She looked like a smaller version. That's just a way different body matchup, style matchup. Holly Holm is like, you know, kind of a athletic fighter with some decent footwork and movement. Just a different build than Pacheco. Pacheco is more like an Andrade, like a walk you down punching type of cyborg. And I just feel like that doesn't really parallel. But I will say we saw she can get tired, slow down, look a little fearful, and she looks stiff and rigid on the feet, in my humble opinion. So she could absolutely dominate on the ground. On the feet, I would make this fight closer to a pick'em, even though Holly's old.
Yeah. kind of surprising that it's 1,200 for a knockout on Holm. Just throwing it out there. That's a wild number, but yes, I think that this fight will be interesting. There's no way in hell that it's 10% for each of these fighters. You have name value for Holm, and you have the Harrison side. That's the A side, the money line type play. That it also gets you off a Nickal. Let's be honest. Everyone's going to first click Nickal. I think that Harrison's going to garner some ownership, but we move on to the next fight of the night, which is Aljamain Sterling versus Calvin Kattar. Was there some movement this week? Holy moly. I think there was, because I remember seeing it somewhat closer to even money, maybe even as well as a week or two ago. But Aljamain minus 175 at this stage, Liam. And we have Calvin Kattar at plus 145. Aljamain moving up in weight now. He's 8,400 on this slate. Expected ownership 20%. So it hasn't caught up to that money line value, right? There's a few values. We talked about Andrade in that range. And, Aljamain, when he's winning his fights, is usually coming through a finish, usually coming through that grappling, and it's scoring very, very well. But we have him in a styles clash against Kattar, who negates those takedowns a lot, strikes, and has volume striking. I think stylistically, it's a very fun fight. I look forward to your breakdown of it. Kattar just being 13% owned, but you look at the inside the distance lines for these guys, and it's not super appealing. I got to be honest here, Liam. Plus 275 for Sterling, plus 385 for Kattar. You'd have to sell me on one of those, because those numbers are not that great for this slate.
This is a fight where my gut feeling is that no matter who wins this fight, more often than not, it ends inside the distance. I disagree with the odds makers on this one. The reason I feel that way is because Calvin Kattar hits like a truck, and I don't know that he always gets enough credit for that, but he's knocked out pretty durable fighters over the course of his career. And the guys he didn't knock out, he took a chunk of, their career durability, right? Like Gaethje beat him within an inch of his life in that fight. It was unbelievable. So I think that this is a fight where Calvin Kattar's got a lot to prove, right? He's coming back, trying to hold down his spot in the division. Featherweight, is experiencing some turnover. So he's got opportunities now to maybe make his way back to the top with one or two big wins. And Aljamain Sterling on the other side sees a division where, the champion's calling out his own division. Hey, where are the contenders? Who should I fight? Somebody earn a spot here. And Aljamain's like, hey, I'll step up, create some room for my guy Merab and move on to 145. Is it going to work out for him? I think it's anybody's guess. I think there is a lot of confidence on Aljo, and I don't feel the same way. And the only reason I say that is not because he can't go out there and out-grapple any guy in the UFC. Like, he's that good at grappling. He could beat anybody, catch anybody in a submission. But when you're talking about taking down a guy like Kattar on a surgically repaired knee, maybe that makes it easier, but it's yet to be seen. And when you look at Calvin Kattar's takedown defense historically, it's been excellent. Nobody's really tested it. So it's an unknown. Unknown should push the line closer to 50-50. And when I'm looking at this fight, I'm saying to myself, you got an unknown, Aljamain Sterling up at 145. You got an unknown, how is the takedown defense going to hold up for Kattar? You got an unknown, how is Kattar's knee going to hold up? Is it going to hold up under pressure, under scrutiny? We don't know that. Aljamain Sterling coming back off being knocked out in his last fight. How is that going to play a role in this fight? Is he going to be more tentative? Is he going to be a little bit more hesitant? Is he not going to want to take more damage? He's a smart guy. He's got other options outside the cage. Maybe he starts taking a couple punches and says, hey, I don't need this in my life. Like, maybe I'll just move on, do something different, retire. I wanted to retire young. I got a championship. I got everything I needed. Meanwhile, Calvin Kattar's still hungry, man. He said, as soon as he got that knee surgery, he's like, nothing has changed. The dream is the same. I'm coming for the title. I'm coming for this. He still believes. So like a Josh Emmett, like some of these guys, like, these are old dogs. They're not here to just give their spot away. They're really going to fight for it. And I do think Calvin Kattar is being a little bit slept on this week. And I say this as a huge Aljo fan, as a huge Aljo backer, one of the best grapplers in the UFC. His takedowns, D3 level. And I say that as respect. I'm a D3 guy myself. But there's a reason, right? There's some guys at the D1 level that are a little bit different with the takedowns, with the upside, with the wrestling, with the pace. And I do think that Aljo doesn't have all those intangibles. Maybe wasn't the same quality and caliber of athlete. He's built himself into a championship level athlete. There's nothing you can take away from the guy. But when you go against these guys that are a little bit bigger and that can stuff some takedowns, put some damage on you, I just have never liked the way that Aljo reacts to getting hit. He does a great job of not getting hit, of throwing a lot of shots, of moving out of the way. He's got great defense. He's got good takedowns. But when he's getting hit, the reactions have never looked great. Not against Petr Yan, not against Magic Marlon Moraes when he knocked him out brutally in the first round, not against, Sean O'Malley, where the first couple connections that are landing are, again, sending him to the ground, busting him open. Sean's a sniper. All those things are true. But Chito Vera just walked through the absolute fire after a career's worth of damage in his prior fights and made it the full 25 minutes. Aljamain Sterling lost his belt in 7 minutes. So when I look at Aljo, I think there's a lot of credit and respect that needs to be given that's not given to him. But now there's a lot of people that at the betting window want to give him that credit and respect when I think that there's a lot more uncertainty here. So I think Calvin Kattar's a live dog to win this fight by knockout, but I do give Aljo just a little bit more decision equity. I would probably make him a -120, -125 favorite in this spot, but I do think the line has gotten a little bit out of hand. I think the value is on Calvin Kattar, and I think that in this fight, Calvin Kattar by knockout at 5-1. Again, I'm just looking at that like, are we sure about that? Like, have we seen Aljo take these shots at 145? Like, it just seems a little bit presumptuous to me. And here's the other thing. Last thing I'll leave you with Narrative Nation here. Dana White, is he a New York guy? Is he trying to put this on because he's a huge fan of Aljo? He wants to see Aljo get the title shot at 145. I'll tell you, from the bottom of my heart, I think that's the last thing on his mind. I think he's like, hey, Calvin, you feel good? You think you can knock this guy the hell out? All right, we're booking it. 145, UFC 300. Good luck, kid. That's the way I feel like that conversation went.
Yeah, and I was obviously surprised when I first saw the line go heavier towards Sterling. Did that movement happen like in the beginning of the week? Where did that, like, I feel like it was the initial
movement happened early. It happened early.
Okay. All right. Because I was like, wow, I must have been updated in a while. But yeah, I mean, it's a fight that's going to go overlooked because it's one of those ones that's expected to go to a decision. 2-1 favorite to go to a decision isn't going to get you a lot of looks on this slate. And I feel like these are the ones that can differentiate you from the competition. And that's what we're looking to get towards the top of the rankings. We move on to the next fight of the night where we see Alexander Rakic versus Yuri Prochazka. We have it near pick'em. Basically, I'm just going to call it a pick'em for all intensive purposes. Slight favoritism towards Rakic at this stage. But we have Prochazka, the underdog, expected 20% ownership and 20% for Rakic. Man, everything seems to be evened out for ownerships on this slate. And this is one of your prototypical ones that I don't think I'm going to want to sniff this one and even have a piece of it if it goes to a decision, because it's just not going to be a lot to be had. It'll be a tactical striking affair likely. But when we talk about weight class, you talk about importance to getting back up to a title shot, I think it's going to be important that these guys come out and put on a show. It's -200 inside the distance. There's your equity for fantasy-wise. 8,200, 8K, going to be easy to get into lineups. Prochazka, the favorite over Rakic to win inside the distance. You know I love this. Long-term, I love digging into these guys. +135 Prochazka inside the distance compared to Rakic +225. The thing I'm worried about is, we talk about quick turnaround. It's not a quick turnaround. That last November, he got knocked out, but still, he's coming in off of a loss. Great matchmaking. You have Rakic coming in off of a loss as well, but they're still right there for title contention. What are you looking at in this one? Potential fantasy output? Is it really all caked into that finish equity? And I don't think we'd be that surprised if either guy won, but I also wouldn't be surprised if either guy hit the optimal lineup at somewhat lower ownership compared to these 5-round fights around him.
Tapology just froze up on me. Sorry about that. When I'm looking at this fight, man, I tend to agree. I think that this is a fight that both guys can win. I think that being lined close makes some sense. Let's talk about the unknowns here with Rakic. He's coming off of a knee surgery. He's been inactive for a little bit of a time. And the thing that was concerning for me is not just the knee surgery, but the fact that the Blachowicz fight was very competitive. That was a fight where I think a lot of people were expecting Rakic to look good. 30 versus 39 years of age. Blachowicz coming off some title losses, some upsetting results. And he was able to bounce back, get the win over him. A little bit of weird circumstances with the knee injury. However, when you look at that knee injury, it was not caused by it wasn't Curtis Blades, Tom Aspinall, right? Curtis Blades, Tom Aspinall, first strike of the fight. Like, yes, Curtis Blades landed a nice one too. I'll give him that credit. But also Tom Aspinall then had a non-contact stepping back from being hit, lands on his knee. Oh, like tears his that you kind of just wash off like, hey, you know what? That accidents happen. It's fighting. But Jan Blachowicz checked a bunch of kicks, landed a bunch of kicks back, and then he damaged the leg really badly of Rakic. So then when Rakic went to step backwards, his leg was damaged and the other leg gave out as a result. So he was not bearing his weight equally between both legs as you typically would. He was bearing his weight all on the back leg after a weight transfer, and it just popped his back leg. So you give him the credence, hey, young guy could still come back. Is he younger than Yuri? No, he's not. So it's like Yuri's the younger guy. He's had more professional experience. He hasn't had more UFC experience, but he's been fighting UFC quality fighters outside the UFC for a long time in Japan. And were we always seeing Yuri make plus EV decisions? No, sometimes he does crazy, wild things. That's why Yuri can't really be a huge favorite in any fight. Minus 200 against Glover Teixeira is like the limit. And why did I think that was a deserving bet, a deserving, price? It's because he had an insane durability edge. And so his durability finally gets tested by Alex Poatan Pereira, one of the scariest kickboxers of all time. I think 22 knockouts in professional kickboxing. I think 7 knockouts in professional mixed martial arts. The guy is an absolute hammer. So he caught him on the chin in a fight that I thought Yuri was arguably winning, right? Like it was a close fight, but Yuri took him down in the first round. And in the second round, he was landing the more significant blows, I felt, on the feet, save for leg kicks, right? Just landing big shots to the head, backing up Alex, getting in his face. And then he got hit with a short left hook and he hit the deck. And Alex did everything right. Elbows to the head, hip bumped him into the mount. Mark Goddard stopped it a touch early, but Yuri went out briefly. That's why he got hip bumped into the mount. So, hey, hats off to him. Great fighter, great result. But that was also him coming back off an injury. So was that the best of Yuri Prochazka? I think that's an open question, right? I think he tried his best, but I don't think that was his best. So Yuri doesn't train conventionally. He doesn't fight conventionally. He can always get clipped. His leg kick defense is a liability. But how comfortable is Rakic going to be throwing leg kicks after he just injured his leg? Is that going to be his primary game plan? Maybe. Is he going to go out there and look for takedowns like he did against Jan Blachowicz? Maybe. But again, Yuri Prochazka can give up some takedowns, but is he easy to hold down? He's not like these other old men in the division. He's strong. He's physical. He horses his way back up to his feet oftentimes. We've seen that against Glover Teixeira, an elite black belt. So it's like, I just don't believe the narratives out there that I'm hearing that Rakic is like, just a lock to beat Yuri, because that is how a lot of short people feel this week. Is like, oh my God, Rakic, these head kicks and then, oh my God, his takedowns. I'm just like, he's coming back off a long layoff. Yuri's been the way more active guy, especially of late. And I think that he's dangerous in every position. So for me, any plus money on this fight is good. Laying chalk on either side is probably a really dangerous proposition. And I think somebody is getting violently finished more often than not. But here's the other thing. Could we see a more tentative version of these guys after one guy got injured and one guy got knocked out? Yeah. I think that that's a live possibility. And also, both guys have shown a propensity, a willingness to mix in takedowns, wrestling, grappling when they need it. Could both guys pursue takedowns in this fight? Yeah. So it just seems to me like a fight that could hit the scorecards and surprise people, maybe not hit the optimal lineup. If both guys are a little trepidatious in round 1, wrestling in round 2 and 3, that's the way I see it going. But I also think like Yuri invites a lot of risk. So somebody's probably going to get killed at some point in this fight because he's going to try and do that. And I think Rakic has motivated him, honestly, with the talk this week. And I think he's kind of poked the bear. We'll see how that plays out for him. But I think that's going to lead to Yuri probably putting him on a highlight reel. So that's the way I see it. I've always been a Yuri guy. I believe in Yuri. But I also have bet Dominic Reyes at like plus 140 against Yuri. And he was whooping his ass and almost submitted him and then got killed. Because that's what Yuri does. So Yuri's just a guy that has every ability to win a fight. He could submit high-level black belts because he can outlast them, outpace them, outwork them for 5 rounds. He can also go out there and knock out great strikers like he's done in the past. But he can get chinned. He's been chinned more than one time in his career. So he could get chinned again here. Rakic has an unbelievable head kick. Great fight on paper. But give me Yuri, the more active guy who's fighting for titles and losing to only the best guys.
Let me ask you, there's a fight we went over earlier that has 20% for each of these guys. It's the Yusuff and Lopez fight. Which one would you slightly rank above it? Like, well, even though we just talked about Yuri and Rakic can end the fight at any time, we're talking about all these fighters being 20% owned potentially in the same type of price range. How are you handling that? Like, are you going to be trying to get a piece of this light heavyweight and pray that it gets to the finish, or are you going to hope for that action over the 3 rounds? Like, would you be more apt to play the Lopez or Yusuff?
Dude, to tell you the truth, like
it's tricky.
My reads on the fights this week would basically tell me, like, do not play fantasy. And the reason being, I just lean towards a lot of underdogs this week. Maybe they come through, but like I'd have, $1,200 of salary relief. Like I could add a whole nother, like I could just start dealing new fighters. Like, hey, give me, like I just have a lot of room left over at the top because I feel like a lot of dogs are going to come through, and especially a lot of dogs that could score big in their wins. So that's what makes it complicated. In their losses, maybe they put up 3 points, and then we're just sitting there, crying in our coffee. But in wins, I just think they're going to put up huge scores. So.
Yeah, no, interesting. And I think that that's the fun game that we play, right? Are you going to invest into a Lopez versus Yusuff? Better pace, faster pace. Probably could go 3. You could get bailed out with like a 30-27 type of decision. But at the same time, you're playing with fire because Yuri can end the fight at any time. And Rakic, I think, is going to be coming in a little bit under-owned. Lower owned than the 20%. I just don't think people are going to get to him. Let's move on to the next spot, though, where we see the biggest price fighter, the most hyped fighter, probably in the UFC, I would assume. Now, I don't know if he's got the love, but he's certainly hype trained. 9,500. Bo Nickal, minus a zillion, minus 2,500 at this stage. Come back on Cody Brundage, plus 1,100. I mean, Mr. Nickal has done it twice already. And if you can count the Contender Series, those would have been 100 plus wins, 128 points, 200 more than every other fighter. I talked to you about Kayla Harrison being potentially in a ceiling type grappling dominance, would get there. But this is a different level, man. I talked about Bo Nickal literally having a quick win bonus in his pocket already in the UFC. It's always going to be out there. He's getting the striking. But we got Cody Brundage, who 2 wins in the UFC back-to-back. 1 was a disqualification. People aren't going to look into that. People are going to game log. I guarantee that. Nobody's going to want to play him. It's going to be single digit. I don't know if it's quite 3%. People will try to get crafty. But we're talking about a guy who can wilt down the stretch, has quit before, not had the best fight IQ. Why did they select him, first of all, to be the guy for UFC 300 against Bo Nickal? Is it just for the quote-unquote free win? Is it to test him? Is it why Cody Brundage? And then secondly, how does he bust? I think we actually, like, unless you're picking Brundage outright, which I'd be surprised, but maybe there's some livelihood. He can jump guillotine or something. How could Bo Nickal fumble the bag here? Because he's going to need 105 plus.
I think he said he wanted this fight to go to the second round, if I heard a snippet of an interview correctly. And that would be the only concern here is like, hey, Bo tries to extend him, stretch the fight out a little bit. Listen, I'm not going to disparage Cody Brundage. He's got real wins in the UFC. Like, let's just call it the way it is. Tresean Gore, didn't expect him to win that fight. Went out there and knocked him out brutally. The Dalcha Lungiambula fight, I thought that fight was as good as over. I thought Dalcha was going to knock him out in the first round. I thought that he was looking like he was wilting and quitting under pressure there. And then Dalcha inexplicably goes for a takedown and gets himself submitted with a guillotine. It was like a blessing from the gods. And then he was like, you know what? I'm going to take that blessing and parlay it into me pulling a guillotine against Adolfo Vieira, ADCC world champion. So we all know how that story ended for him. He ends up getting submitted shortly thereafter. Cody Brundage, I feel like, is a guy that wilts under pressure. And Bo Nickal is a pressure guy. Like, that's what he's going to do to people in the UFC. He puts them under pressure on the feet because they're afraid of him shooting a takedown, because they know if he gets a hold of me, I'm probably getting taken down. And if I get taken down, I'm probably going to lose. So you see reactions from people that are not common, right? Like, they're normally trying to panic, get themselves to the cage, and then Bo takes him down, and then the fight's over shortly thereafter. Against Jamie Pickett, listen, Jamie's a strong guy, and it was a low blow. No two ways about that. But when you look, Jamie Pickett didn't want to be there, in my humble opinion, at all for that fight. And when you look at how the fight played out itself, like, Bo was doing a couple things incorrectly and just knew, like, Jamie Pickett's going to tap to this eventually. And he did. So that was the way that it went, right? Like he just grabbed him in a vice grip, and it wasn't the best grip that you've ever seen, and it didn't look like he was even going to finish it, but he just never let go, never conceded, and got the tap. And when you look at a guy like Cody Brundage, he's been finished on the ground a number of times by ground and pound, by submissions. He's been put in bad compromised situations. He's gotten out wrestled and out grappled in a lot of these fights. The significant strike numbers are very low for Cody Brundage. Like I think like the most he's ever landed is like 30 in a UFC fight. Just criminally bad stuff. And he does have power. So like that will affect your significant strike stats, but also he sells out for most of that power in round one. Jacob Malkoun was about to defeat him, in my humble opinion, had him on the ropes, had him on the verge of, being broken in that fight. And then he took the easy way out, in my humble opinion. So again, you don't want to disparage him. Tough guy, goes out there, puts it on the line every time. He's won fights that you didn't expect him to. But Bo Nickal is here for a real reason, right? And I think that Cody Brundage is here to be an ancillary figure in the Bo Nickal story. And that's the way it is. I don't think he's a star. I don't think he's marketable. I don't think anybody gives a shit about Cody Brundage, with all due respect. And I think that they're here for Bo Nickal to see whether or not he's real. And I think he is real. So I think he's going to get these takedowns. I think he's going to get the top position and beat the tar out of Cody Brundage. That's how I see it going. But I do think that if he decides to exchange on the feet, try and, lengthen this fight out and get cocky, that's the one way he loses this fight, is Cody Brundage connecting with a big shot. I think the thoughts of the guillotine are a little bit, farcical. Honestly, I don't think you're going to out grapple Bo Nickal positionally in the first round in a UFC fight, period, point blank. I've seen him roll with black belts and look very good. So that's the one thing that I don't really buy. However, I think that, could he rock him? Yeah, it's a cage fight between 285-pound men. I mean, absolutely. So Bo's got to be smart. He's got to keep his head on his shoulders. But I think he's a better athlete. I think he's a better wrestler. I think he's a better grappler. And I think he's a guy with more heart overall. So that's the way I feel about it. We haven't seen that tested in the cage as much, but every time we've seen it tested with Cody Brundage, we got an answer we didn't want, right? And I think the opposite is true for Bo in terms of his wrestling career. I mean, I've seen this guy in tough matches fight his way to the bitter end. And I've also seen, most of the time he's outclassing the best guys in the country at wrestling. That's what he was doing throughout his college career. And I think that that's what we've seen from him so far in the UFC, right? Like, who has he not outclassed? Maybe Jamie Pickett, and he just out-physicaled him in every position. So, yeah, give me Bo Nickal here easily.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is it's just $200.
Money line is off, though. I mean, it's a mixed martial arts fight. Like, if you're laying minus 2,500, you've already given up. There's no chance.
Well, I mean, yeah, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. And
I'm just saying, like, that it's so foreign to my process, I would never.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. It's just, it's hard to ignore Bo Nickal and his scoring style and how easy it is to get him into your lineups, right? Like, I think if I'm going to be doing Bo Nickal, I'm probably going to leave some money on the table. We'll talk about how you attack those 5-round fights. But I also think a really interesting build, and this is just something I'm going to throw out there, is like a Harrison and Bo Nickal type of lineup. People aren't going to want to do that on this slate. So paying up for Bo and Harrison might be an interesting way to attack things, but we'll talk about that later on. And we move on to the next fight of the night. Really, really fun, upper echelon, high-level fight. We have Arman Tsarukyan versus Charles Oliveira. Arman coming in as a decent favorite, minus 200 range, minus 240s out there at this stage. Come back on Oliveira, plus 175. Everybody's favorite guy that rose to stardom, got the belt, Charles Oliveira. Now they're trying to give him as a stepping stone for Arman, I think. Arman's been somewhat undefeated in there. Garbrandt he lost to a few fights ago, but he's got that prototypical fantasy relevance in his fights. High tempo, control time, takedowns, volume striking, a little bit of everything in there, and that's very friendly for scoring purposes. Then you look at Charles Oliveira, his fight style. He doesn't quite have the same amount of like offensive takedowns. He's probably more so relying on submissions, the knockdown to a submission, getting some control that way. But I really like this fight, man. It's hard for me to not invest into this fight off of the upper echelon 5-round fights, because I look at this one as even 3 rounds, there's going to be a built-in floor of 2 guys coming in head to head going for it, because they're still there in the title contention. And Charles Oliveira is getting disrespected with the ownership. Let's be honest, 11% ownership is really kind of crazy. We talked about Jim Miller at 7,600 there, with Charles Oliveira being 7,500. I expect Charles to be a little bit more owned. I got to be honest. He's got some name value, but plus 200 inside the distance and 7,500 is something I'm kind of interested in, Liam. You got the leverage. We talked about that. And plus 100 inside the distance for Tsarukyan. So what's going to give in this one? Are we going to see, you know, a veteran Charles Oliveira? Are we going to see a car wreck where he gets destroyed in the first round and then comes back? Because I think the realm of possibilities in this fight is quite wide, which makes me very interested in playing it.
Yeah, I'll be quick because my thoughts on this fight are, I think, pretty well known at this point. I like Charles Oliveira as the underdog. And the only reason I say that is because you've got the most dangerous guy in the history of the UFC at plus 190. So it's pretty hard to ignore that, right? Like, dangerous, what do I mean by that? I mean, he can knock you out. He can hurt you on the feet. He can hurt you on the ground. He can submit you on the feet. He can submit you on the ground. He can take your back and submit you. He can take people down, as he's done in the past as well. Competed with guys in the wrestling. When he can't compete with you in the wrestling, he'll enter on leg entanglements. He'll try and mix it up with you in different phases and always keep you guessing. So do we have a chance that Arman Tsarukyan goes out there and just cleans his clock in the first round? I mean, yeah, he just did that to Beneil Dariush. You know who else did that? Charles Oliveira. And he did it first. And he did it in just as impressive fashion, in my view. The only difference was Arman had no resistance in that fight. He was much faster than Beneil. Just got to the target quicker, took him out. Maybe he does that to Charles. Charles can be hit. He's a little bit hittable. So I like this fight to end inside the distance. But again, I like the fight to end inside the distance, and Charles Oliveira's got no shot to win it. It's like, I've never seen a fight like that, because a lot of the most elite guys in the world at 155 pounds, whether you want to say it's Justin Gaethje, you want to say it's Dustin Poirier, you want to say it's this guy or the other guy, this guy's gone out there and competed with them. And except Islam Makhachev in the desert, he's looked damn good doing it. Even the Kevin Lee fight, hey, shade to the old Charles. Is he going to quit? Is he breaking? Is he slowing down? Here's this submission. Hold this. Thanks for playing, buddy. That was when Kevin Lee, that win still meant something. That was when he was still a title relevant guy. So I just think that you're looking at a guy in Charles Oliveira who's been there, done that at the highest level for the longest amount of time. And Tsarukyan is the flavor of the month. He is a great fighter. He could be a future world champion. He could rematch Islam and win the belt, but he's got to do it. He's got to prove it. He's got to show those things. Minus 300 favorite against Garbrandt, left it within the margins. I thought that was a close fight. I thought it was a fight that could go either way. I thought Arman deserved to be favored, and he did, and he deserved to win it. But you know something? He left it within the margin. He slowed down over the course of 5, and he gave the fight away. That's the truth. When you look at this fight, I say to myself, man, Charles Oliveira, this is not a 5-round fight. This is a 3-round fight. This is a all-out action fight for 15 minutes. He can give everything. He can go out there and empty the jug from round 1 till the bitter end. He's got the conditioning and the cardio to do it. Okay, on the other side, you've got a guy in Arman Tsarukyan. He likes to be on top. He likes to pursue takedowns. Against the Joel Alvarez's of the division, I was all on board. Minus 200, yeah. Inside the distance, plus 175, absolutely. Now you're saying it's the same likelihood that he does that he did to Joel Alvarez, some guy. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I just mean in terms of what he's proven in the UFC. Who the hell is Joel Alvarez? He's some guy. He beat Joe Duffy. I'm sorry. You're looking at this guy, Charles Oliveira, he's a champion. He's a guy who's been around with every record, submissions, knockouts, knockdowns, whatever you want to do. He can go out there and compete with any of these guys. So I just think of Charles Oliveira as a guy that gets perennially disrespected. I believe he's 7-4 as a UFC underdog. He's done the damn thing many times. I think he's capable of doing it again. 35, a little bit old for the division. I acknowledge the downside risk. Maybe he gets taken down and beaten up. Who's done that? Islam Makhachev, great fighter, really sound. You know who didn't get easily washed by Arman Tsarukyan? Neto BJJ. Neto BJJ. Like, let's be serious for a second. I think Charles Oliveira would submit Neto BJJ. I think if they fought on the feet, he would absolutely knock him out cold, brutally in the first round. So that's the stakes with Charles. It's like, you want to play that game with him. You want to get rocked, wobbled, stumbled against Charles and start shooting takedowns. Good luck. And the other thing is, if you don't want to shoot the takedowns, if you say, hey, let me keep this clean, clear, up on the feet, yeah, maybe you could win. Maybe you could knock him out. But Charles can knock you out too. Dustin Poirier is one of the most prolific knockout artists in the history of the division. I know the record says submission. We saw that. But you know what was happening to Dustin Poirier? He was getting brutalized to the body. He was getting beat up in the clinch and he broke mentally. That's what happened. Then he quit. He gave the physical thank you for playing. But that was not about, jiu-jitsu. That was about, I am hurt. I am fatigued. I'm tired. I want out. And he got out. Give me Charles.
Yeah, I mean, arguably another one of the best top, probably 3 ownership plays on the slate would be playing Charles Oliveira, and you're buying into a plus 200 inside the distance at 7,500. That's a beautiful price to be buying into. And overall, we're going to be talking about the next 3 fights that are going to have all the ownership. This is one I'm going to want a piece of, and I don't. This card is so stacked that I want to have a lot of exposure to the fights that aren't 5 rounds, just because I know that ownership's going to be there, and you start grabbing some of these ones, you can build underdogs like Charles Oliveira or Miller. It gets really interesting what you can do for your lineups, and like I said, it's very easy to get up to a Bo Nickal, so that's another world if you're grabbing Charles. We move on to the next fight. That begins our 5-round affairs. The BMF title, Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway. 2 absolute warriors, Hall of Famers probably in the UFC. We have Justin Gaethje. He's somewhat down to a minus 170, minus 155 range. Money has been coming in on Max Holloway. Max Holloway kind of entered the week plus 200 range, and things are trending towards his direction. We have Justin Gaethje inside the distance lines here. Plus 155, Holloway plus 350. We have Holloway moving up in weight. That's an important context to it. Obviously, a guy who has a zillion strikes out there. He's the rare case, though, Liam, that he can score a zillion points over 5 rounds just strictly from striking. That's just the output that he has. And he's got a guy that can match him tit for tat. Probably Justin Gaethje likes to throw in volume. The leg kicks are there. The knockout ability's there. Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to throw it to you right away. What's your breakdown of this one? Because 8,800, you're going to have 40% ownership on Justin Gaethje. It's going to be some high ownership. I think you're going to want some leverage of one of these 5-round fights. It's going to be important. And then obviously everyone's going to gravitate towards that middle range. But Max Holloway, man, it's got the name value, but he also has the ownership, 45% owned.
I think of Max Holloway as a great fighter. I think of him as a champion, as a guy that's very high level, very difficult for anybody to get one over on. And I think of Justin Gaethje as a guy who's very talented, who's got a lot of skill. He's a very dangerous fighter. He's got a lot of offensive output. But I don't think of him on the same level, honestly. And I've never thought of him on the same level. I thought that he could beat Charles Oliveira, and I thought that was mostly because of circumstances, missing weight, stripped of the title. I just thought everything was coalescing for, Charles is going to have an underperformance. Gaethje, he's at home. He's in Arizona. He's going to have an overperformance. The exact opposite was true. He looked terrible in that fight, landed the shots that he wanted to, didn't take Charles out of the fight, did put himself in bad positions, did get hit, did get hurt, did get clipped, did look out of sorts, and then got owned on the mat. It was not close or competitive at all once it got to the grappling phase, I felt. So when you look at how he's reacted to being put on the mat in the UFC, it's been horrible. And when you look at how he's reacted to being in deep waters in the UFC, unless it's a fight he dominated and controlled, like the Tony Ferguson fight, it hasn't looked very good. So the last time out, he got a knockout. It was early in the fight. He looked good doing it. But I'll tell you what, Dustin Poirier, man, he's a great fighter. He's a dangerous guy, but he's another age contemporary. He's a little bit older. He's been up there. He's been having these wars. And the way to get to him typically has been grappling. I don't think that he expected that head kick to come. I think that he was expecting leg kicks all night, and he got taken by surprise. Max Holloway is not going to be taken by surprise, in my view. I think he knows how to prepare for this guy. I think that he wants to prove to people, hey, I still am that guy. I'm not a guy you can overlook. I'm not a guy who you could tell, hey, I can't go to 155 for what? I can fight anybody. I can beat anybody. And I think he truly feels that way. And I think you look at his skills on paper. What is he bad at? He could box. He could kickbox. He could strike. He could wrestle. He could grapple. This guy said, I'll step up on short notice and fight Khabib. I don't care. They pulled him from the fight. But he was willing to do it. This guy's not afraid of any man, woman, or child. So I think Max Holloway is not afraid, like other people are, of him fighting Justin Gaethje. And I think Justin Gaethje is a guy that we've seen the path to beating him. Stay in his face, throw a lot of strikes, keep the pressure on him, push him backwards, take the big shots that are coming back, because it's not easy to fight this guy. He's going to throw. He's going to land. but he's also willing to get hit. He takes damage all the time in his fights. Even the fights where he's wanted to look technical and wanted to do things right. He got blasted by Fiziev. He got blasted by Poirier a little bit in round 1. He had the better round. He had the better fight. But again, this is a guy who's in there getting hit cleanly in every fight. He's ducking into head kicks in almost every fight. Max Holloway is going to have opportunities to land. He's set striking records in the UFC for how much he can touch you all night. So I just don't see a weak area in Max's game. If he gets knocked out here, again, hat tip to Justin Gaethje. But the people who are presuming it to happen when it's like, it's not on record that it can happen, right? He's never been knocked down, never been finished. He got hurt by Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier knocked out Justin Gaethje. They fought around a similar time. So it's just like back at that time, the same two guys fought Dustin Poirier. One guy took him to an all-time classic war and just didn't have the staying power, the knockdown ability to get one over on him. And then meanwhile, he did outland him, by the way. And then meanwhile, Justin Gaethje broke down the stretch. He got beat in a fight where he landed all the leg kicks. He did all the damage. He beat him up. And then he broke. He got tired and he got finished. And he could get beat up in the clinch. We've seen that happen to him before. We've seen limb length be a problem for him in the grappling. I think there's a lot of things that said red flag on Justin Gaethje -2XX. And that's why the line is adjusted accordingly.
I don't like investing into guys that have negative striking differentials, and I'm sure you know this, but it's not by a lot. It's by 0.15. He's throwing 7.35 strikes per minute. He's absorbing 7.5 strikes. Not a recipe for long-term success in the UFC, as we know from Mr. Justin Gaethje. And the volume is just so hard to ignore in this fight. Like, it's just going to be strike, 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 strike. And that's going to be great for scoring purposes. My problem is, if I'm trying to select a fight that I don't want a piece of, and when it comes to the 3-round fights, this one is hard to ignore. This one is not going to be one that I'm going to be like, I don't think either guy has a path. Both of the guys have strong paths to scoring and strong paths to destroy the slate, because Justin Gaethje's wins are probably going to be volume-based into a finish, and that's going to be great. And Holloway can get bailed out on almost any form of a Holloway win is going to be $1 million. Let's be honest, 7,400, and the ownership is all here. I'm very, very, very sad about that. 7,400, the money equity, the money line, all the money coming towards him. That's the problem, Liam. That's 40% equity. It sticks out like a sore thumb. Include the name value. We're in trouble. All the ownership's here. So know if you're fading this fight, it's going to be very, very, very scary for you and your lineups. But we are going on to the real exact title fights. You know, BMF title, made up title just to get some more money. But at least it's 5-round fights. We like 5-round fights. What I will tell you about, though, and probably which will get you a UFC title, is signing up for RotoGrinders Premium with NBA, PGA, NHL, MMA, and MLB. Get yourself a 6-month combo subscription at an exclusive price of $469.99. That's a savings of $250 instead of buying every single package individually. You get that full combo pack for $469.99. We're also running an exclusive discount of $40 off your first month of a combo premium. Those that want to test run this before getting their toes into the water, you can get it with a 3-day pass at $19.99. Check out the links in the description below and sign up today. Get some of those tools to help you win some monies. But Liam, I talked about it. This is the women's title, the Chinese battle here. China versus China. It's kind of sad that they didn't do it in China. I got to be honest, just for both of these ladies. I think it would have elevated this fight a little bit more, but it's a very high-level fight. We have Weili Zhang coming in as the champion against Yan Xiaonan. We have Weili as a massive favorite for a women's fight here, -500 range, and money continues to come in on her through the week. We have Yan come back about a +375. And when you look at the context of this one, we have, people still don't like to play women's fights, but they like themselves some Weili Zhang, man, almost 50% ownership. When I talked about that potential to go, Kayla Harrison and Nickal, that's just because I think there's some obvious builds. It's grabbing pieces of these, Bo Nickal, Weili Zhang, Max Holloway, then you grab some values. There's going to be some obvious builds, and get away from that. Potentially you have a world where, and this is one of those situations I don't often say, we have Yan Xiaonan at 7K. As long as she's able to stop some of these takedowns, it goes 5 rounds. There's a world where she can pay off a salary here over 5 rounds, even in a loss, man. I mean, I got to be honest. I think there's a world where you could get away with it. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I just think that her price tag is everything. And then if it's a competitive fight, you're going to be very happy with that. I'm very, very interested in what's it called? The value that's coming in on Weili Zhang. Is that something that you can get behind? And are people just going to be overlooking Yan? Because Yan is a fighter here who's going to be 20% in a 5-round fight, probably the lowest percentage 5-round fighter out of all of them. Is that a spot we should look at as well, potentially?
I think that there's no two ways about this. The value side is Yan Xiaonan. And if you look at sharp opinions on why Weili Zhang is the sharper side, they would tell you it's because she's going to get takedown, she's going to have upside there. And that's very possible, right? That is how she justifies this price. But I think her upside is like minus 500. And I think her downside is like, plus 150. So when you look at it, why do I say that? And maybe plus 150 is a little bit harsh, but I would say minus 150 to minus 185 is what I would line this just offhand. And the reason I say that is because against Carla Esparza, Yan Xiaonan was favored, and people forget this. But the reason she was because she hadn't been taken down. She hadn't been beaten up on the ground. And Carla Esparza, most motivated performance you'll ever see from her in her career, takes her down, passes her guard, beats her up. She could have done the exact same thing to Marina Rodriguez, but she's out there looking for leg locks and pulling guard and whatever. You see that was a version of Carla Esparza that we've never seen before or since. The most aggressive version of her ever. And she beat the tar out of her. Hey, caught her off guard, surprised her. And she looked like a fish on the ground. That's the truth. She looked terrible on the mat. She had never been there. And a girl who's a grappler and a wrestler, a Team Oyama girl for a long time, exposed her. And then she did what she needed to. She moved to America. She goes to Team Alpha Male. She improves. And then I get plus 200 against Mackenzie Dern. Thank you. Really close fight. I'll acknowledge that too. But you've got, on paper, 2 women who are the exact same. Okay. And what I mean by that is Weili's a star. She's won the title fight. She's been in the big opportunities. The other girl, Yan Xiaonan, has the same record, 8-2 in the promotion. Okay. She didn't lose to Rose Namajunas, but she lost to Marina Rodriguez in a bullshit split decision that I would have scored for her. And she lost to Carla Esparza, another champion. That's it. So she's fought the best of the best. She beat Claudia Gadelha. She's beaten Jessica Andrade, stopped her in the first round via knockout. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, because it's exactly what Zhang Weili did. So Zhang Weili now goes out there and out-grapples Amanda Lemos, who can't grapple, and out-grapples, what's her name? Carla Esparza, who didn't look like she wanted to be there from the opening bell. And now she's the second coming. And I think she's a great fighter. I think she's a number 1 pound for pound female in the sport. But I think everything about Yan Xiaonan is very similar to Zhang Weili. And if this fight takes place on the feet, it should be closer to a pick'em. So that's the way I truly feel about this fight. I think if anybody's more likely to pursue low kicks, it's Zhang Weili. And I think that meanwhile, Yan Xiaonan is going to try and pick away with 1-2s, moving, combinations, and counter striking. That's a good way to attack Zhang Weili. So, like, if she is able to avoid takedowns, to your point, she's going to win this fight, in my view. So it's going to be very competitive, but I think she's got power to compete with Zhang on the feet. And I think that on the ground, she's not a complete fish. I think she used to be. I don't think she is anymore. Is she the world's greatest grappler? No. But defensively, will she get submitted in this fight? I don't think so if Amanda Lemos is surviving, honestly. So it's the way I see it, man. And Zhang Weili continues to improve. If she shows a better product here, hats off to her. But for me, got to give it to Yan Xiaonan as the value side. And I think both of these women make some sense. If Zhang Weili's winning and justifying her price, it's takedowns. But I think that on the other side, Yan Xiaonan, if somebody wins this fight via first round knockout, I think it's more likely to be Yan Xiaonan. That's the honest truth.
And out of the 5-round fights, if there was going to be one that busts, this is probably going to be the one out of all of it, because I just think there's ability where they're stalling, whether it be the takedowns or slower pace striking, because they end up being just from the same country. They really, I don't know if they're going to go to war. Let me just put it that way. They might just want to, stand at each other, kickbox, and that's not going to be good for fantasy relevance. But we talk about kickboxing. We talk about power striking. We talk about the main event of the evening where we see Alex Poatan Pereira as the favorite, minus 130, come back on Jamal Hill, plus 110. Give it to me. Just go right into it. I'm not even going to build it up. We got the favorite in Poatan and the comeback here for Jamahal, who never lost his title.
Yeah, man, here you go. We've got the main event of the evening, and I have not very strong thoughts on it. The reason I feel that way is because it's an extremely volatile light heavyweight fight. And I think that both these guys have you could steel man the case for both of them, and I'll do so briefly. Alex Pereira, he's a world champion kickboxer. He's one of the most accomplished UFC fighters in the fewest amount of fights. That's a fact. 9th ever double champion, right? 185. 205, beat one of the greatest ever at 185 in Israel Adesanya to do that, to accomplish that fact. Finished him. He's 3-1 against him in the career series. Like, there's just so many things you could say positive about Pereira. Did he look aces in that Blachowicz fight? No, he did not. Did he look aces in the Yuri fight? No, he did not. That's how you poke holes in the resume. You say, hey, this guy's getting backed up. He's getting landed on. These other guys are landing shots. But what else are we noticing about him? When he's not rocked, when he's not getting hurt, he's landing huge leg kicks. He's damaging the hell out of his opponents, and he's hurting them so badly with one shot that they get finished. And so I think Pereira can easily knock out any opponent in the light heavyweight division or the middleweight division. He changed Bruno Silva's life and career by not knocking him out. He just hurt him so bad that the guy's never been the same again. So when I look at those kind of opportunities, I'm like, man, Alex Pereira is that guy, but he's 36 years of age. He's not a great grappler. We saw that again exposed in the Yuri Prochazka fight. And meanwhile, Jamal Hill, not the world's greatest grappler, but he is capable. He is qualified. He does know what he's doing in those positions, went to school on it after the Paul Craig incident, right? But we've also seen he's an ego fighter. He could get dragged into that. Against Paul Craig, he's out there in the guard of Paul Craig for God knows what reason, right? You just look at this guy, Jamal Hill. He believes in himself 100%. He has no doubts. He has no concerns. That could get you brutally slept. It could also get you the title. Whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. And both these guys believe they're going to knock the other one out. So they're going to get in the pocket in exchange. I think the more durable guy is the younger man, Jamal Hill. He's 32 years of age, but who's been more active? Who's been fighting on these huge cards? That's Alex Pereira. Who do you want to pick there? I don't know. I think you go 50-50 on this in my lineups. I think somebody's getting brutally knocked out. That's how I feel about this, or submitted in the early rounds, club and sub type of deal. But I just think somebody's getting finished here. These two guys are extremely dangerous, and I think that they're going to bring the heat. I think that neither one of these guys is afraid to engage. I think they both believe in their skills and their power. And I think that for Pereira, he's just got to, use his low kicks to take some chip off the shots from Jamal Hill, because Jamal Hill hits very hard and he throws a huge volume of strikes. So you don't want to be out there with him throwing 150 strikes all night. You want to take that leg out from under him early. And how committed is Jamal on that leg? We've seen other guys, tough guys. Weidman said, hey, I got kicked 1 or 2 times in that leg, and I started wanting to switch stance just to be safe. And then I got my other leg broken as a result, because you're not as comfortable fighting from those stances. So I just think it's something to consider here is how he responds coming off of injury. I tweeted it out earlier. A lot of people coming off of, major surgeries. Maybe they all look great. Maybe they all look terrible. That's the inherent volatility of fighting. And for me, it's already a weight class with a lot of volatility at 205.
Absolutely. Volatility is something you need for your lineups. It's a good thing. Embrace the volatility. The one thing I will say about this fight, and then get you out of here with your final thoughts, Jamal Hill, man, this guy sneaky has volume. If he's not getting the knockout early, he's usually getting a ton of significant strikes. And Poatan, man, he still doesn't have that historic, he can go tit for tat and go 150, but he's more apt to just look for those power shots, counter strike. So I do like Jamal Hill, slightly, probably for the price tag. Let's be honest. I'm just surprised that, Jamal Hill plus 140 inside the distance, and his money line's plus 110. I'd rather just take the money line, but we're not here for betting purposes. Let's just talk about this as a whole. You talked about Jim Miller. You talked about Moicano. What are we looking at? Give me how you're going to handle the 3-5 rounders, and we'll get you out of here. Are you going to look at the Holloway? Now that all the ownership's at Holloway, he's hard to get away from. If you go to Yan, you're easily going up and getting a piece of Nickal. Let's not build a lineup. Let's just kind of give the overall thoughts. How are you handling, you said even on Jamal Hill and Pereira? Is that where we get different? We start mixing in Lopes. We start mixing in the Andrades.
I'll tell you what, I think a better exercise, because like I said, I don't really have the strongest lineup construction thoughts this week, would just be to tell you some of these fighters that aren't garnering a lot of ownership.
Go for it.
But then I think are live underdogs. So again, if we're looking at the ownership considerations, could we rank by ownership by chance?
Absolutely.
My man. So smallest to largest, I think that Holly Holm, probably not as great because her floor is very low. Charles Oliveira, also a guy with a low floor, super high ceiling, in my opinion. When you look at Marina Rodriguez, you could make a case for the knockout, right? Hey, she goes out there, she clips Andrade. I'll tell you one thing, Andrade and her losses correlated with the under 2.5 rounds, something to consider. Then you look at a guy like Calvin Kattar, again, ranked featherweight, defending his spot, being overlooked in this spot, could get a knockout win. Hinata Moicano has better decision equity than a guy like Jalen Turner based on the numbers, based on what we know about these two guys. Maybe he gets flatlined in the first round. If he doesn't, huge leverage again. So those are the kind of spots, the Yan Xiaonans that I'd be targeting. Is like, hey, everybody's going to be going the other way. Let me try and look for these less popular sides and hope that they can do something for me. Yan Xiaonan's got 5 rounds to work. Throws a pretty high volume of strikes out there. So I just think that there's a couple ways you could get interesting here. And I think Yan and Moicano, Calvin Kattar, those are some of the ways that you could try and do so, where you're fading some of the grappling narrative, but it's like, yeah, but if we don't get to the grappling, what does this fight look like? Maybe I'm landing a ton of strikes and you're not.
Yeah, and I mean, if they're trying to grapple, they can get caught and hurt, which means more fantasy points for your lineups. Make sure you guys are checking out all of the tools. Liam will have an article out shortly.
Later today.
Oh, there we go. It's going to be out. Best pay-per-view in a long time. The Hangover starts in 2 weeks. Don't worry. We're not going to talk about that. But follow us on Twitter at LiamPicksFights and at H3Buddha. We will see you guys in 2 weeks. Enjoy the fights.